for staying up. I know it's late in the UK. How are you today?
I'm good, Ian. Yes, it's 10:15 in the evening. It's not too bad.
Okay. So fantastic. You're in the Isle of Wight. Tell us a little bit. Tell us a little bit about the Isle of Wight. Where is it? What is it? What's it like?
Well, it's an island about 4 miles off the coast of England. It's on the south coast. It looks out across Portsmouth, a famous naval centre over the years in Britain, though it's gone down a hill a lot in recent times. And it's about 13 miles by 23, something like that. And I've lived here since 1982, and I've been in love with the place since I was a kid. Came in on holiday back in the 1950s for the first time, and fell in love with the place. And I've been living here a long time now.
What did you like the most about it? What drew you to it?
Well, I was as a kid, in fact, still now, was I used to love to watch steam trains, on the railways because I was born in 1952, and steam trains were still the norm when I was a kid, and I loved them. And when I came to the Isle of Wight on holiday, it was like Thomas the Tank Engine. It was an extraordinary place. There was railways all across the island. Most of them have gone now. And they had little engines that all looked the same. They were all named after places on the island, and it was just like Thomas the Tank Engine in real life. So I fell in love with the place from that point of view. But then I fell in love with its beauty and its seascapes, and it's a lovely place to live.
And what is Wight? What's it named after? What is that?
Well, it's Wight, Wight, which was actually a question on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire in Britain some years ago. What is a Wight? And it's in effect, it's an interdimensional entity, if you like a ghostly figure, so that's what the island was named after. And it's a place, that there is a whole. It's not a very big place, but there's a stream of books that have been written, ghost books, been written about the Isle of Wight and all the ghosts and legends of the place. It was occupied by the Romans when they invaded Britain quite a little time ago now. So it's got a hell of a history and a very interesting past.
Now, I think Windsor Castle is famous for having encounters with ghosts. Have you heard of or yourself had any encounter with an extra outside dimension like a ghost? Or
not really what you'd call a ghost, but I've been into places where there was obviously extremely malevolent energies there, which a lot of people feel when you go into an old place where there's been a lot of potential for very negative things happening. You can feel it in the vibe, in the atmosphere, very clearly. In fact, the Isle of Wight's got a very royal history. We just down the road from me, about 3 or 4 miles. It's a place called Osborne House, which is where Queen Victoria spent most of her time. When her husband died, the Prince Albert, she basically went into almost lifelong mourning, and she did much of it here on the Isle of Wight. And the Isle of Wight in those days was just basically fishing and farming. And then when she moved here and built a palace, which is still there, it's a tourist attraction now, in the 19th century, suddenly all the rich and famous people of London and such like all wanted holiday homes on the Isle of Wight so they could holiday where the Queen was. And so most of the Isle of Wight was built very quickly in Victorian times. That's why the buildings of the Isle of Wight are dominated by Victorian buildings and Georgian buildings. And they're all into flats now, but they were holiday homes for the rich and famous once upon a time. So it's got a real royal background. Not that I'm into royalty, by the way. I think it's a ridiculous institution.
Good. We do too over here in the US.
Oh, it's crazy, man. It's crazy. We are still in 2019. deciding who the head of state of Britain and the Commonwealth is by who had sex with who in what order. You know, it's ridiculous. What do you mean? You know,
Right.
yeah, but
Right. Exactly.
they believe in democracy, obviously.
So, okay, so David, why did you leave the BBC? It's back a number of years, of course.
Yeah, a long time ago now. I left the BBC. What was that in the what 1990s sometime around.
Are you
then.
familiar with Tony Gosling, by the way?
Tony?
Yeah.
Tony Gosling.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know Tony. Yeah.
Okay.
I left the BBC. Basically, I got sick of it, and my life was moving into another direction, where I basically ended up going, and the BBC is it's a very strange organisation, and it's very self-centric and looks in on itself and takes itself terribly bloody seriously. And it wasn't a place that I enjoyed working really. And in terms of its news, it's an incredibly biased organisation, which takes positions and supports them by the people it invites on its programs and the ones it won't invite on its programs to skew the angle that it covers these various stories and world events. So it wasn't a place I really enjoyed working at. Glad to go.
And you so you left the BBC. Was it that they were controlling you, the type of stories you could be doing, or you just felt uncomfortable with
the thing was that during the 1980s I became a national spokesman for the British Green Party, and a few other political parties took exception to the fact that I was working at the BBC while being a national spokesman for the British Green Party. So there was a lot of pressure on the BBC to move me out to the demands of these other political parties. But I was very, very glad to go. I'd had enough by then.
Okay, so let's get into a little bit of this New Age conspiracism. As an American,
well, New Age conspiracism. First of all, me and New Age have no connection whatsoever. This is the usual labeling that you get all the time. So. David Icke, New Age conspiracy theorist. So that's put him in a compartment. That's sorted him out. Now, who are you? Let us put you in a compartment. And so it goes on. I'm just a journalist who does not have an editor telling me what I can and cannot research and what conclusions I can and cannot come to. And that is an amazing freedom, because what it means is you can go where the information takes you, no matter where it takes you. And so that's basically what I do. And
I love it.
I'm not someone who comes from a political persuasion or a belief persuasion. I let the information be my guide. Does it stand up? Does it justify itself? And I don't care if it seems to be far out to people. I care about whether the information is valid or not. And it takes you into some very interesting areas. I have a very interesting life because of it.
Yeah, I mean, people that question, it seems like those that are questioning authority are quickly, as you say, defined and pigeonholed and labeled unjustly. Discussion of Truth has hosted a number of former high-level CIA agents that have walked away from the organization basically for that reason. And it's a major threat. Paul Craig Roberts was on the program over a year and a half ago.
Yeah, I know him.
He's saying, Ian, look, as an American, you simply you don't realize, but Americans no longer have constitutional freedoms. But you brought up something very important, and that is the freedom to be able to think and research and question anything you want, and that's called journalism. That's called freedom of press. In your view, David, and you can speak for being based in the UK. In your view, what is the number one? What is the number one threat to that? today? Is it this kind of labeling that's kind of quickly written out by this big, large conglomerate mass media organization like a BBC or like a CNN, and it's kind of keeping anybody that's questioning the narrative, keeping them down and saying, oh, they're this or they're that, or is that what it is, or is there something else?
Well, there's many levels of it. I have a phrase: know the outcome or the desired outcome, and you'll see the journey. And what I've been doing over the last 30 years now, since I've been doing this full time, is uncovering basically where the world is being taken. And when you can ascertain where it's being taken, you can see the journey every day. So, and this is across a massive range of subjects. This is why, what was in my books in the 1990s is now playing out as changes in the world, because if you can uncover this agenda, unless something intervenes to stop it, it will play out. And in predicting how it's planned to play out, you can appear to be predicting the future, because suddenly they said, oh, you said that and it's happening. It's not because I'm predicting the future like some seer. It's because if you can uncover what the agenda is planned to where it's planned to take the world, then unless something intervenes to stop it, it's going to happen. And that's the process. So in terms of freedom of speech, this is the outcome that they're going towards. And I can tell you after 30 years of research, this is the way it is. It's to create a situation ultimately where no one ever sees anything, particularly in the public domain, that the system in all its forms doesn't want you to see and hear. And in other words, there is an official narrative for everything, and no one is allowed to deviate from it. Now, if you are going to create a situation where that is possible, freedom of speech has to go. Because while people have the freedom of speech, they have the freedom to challenge the official narrative. So this is why freedom of speech is the new evil. And what we've seen, it's a strange inversion that's happened in terms of freedom of speech, whereby I remember, on the black and white telly in the 60s, seeing students at Berkeley, for instance, going on marches demanding freedom of speech during the Vietnam protests, etc. Now we see so-called progressives at places like Berkeley who go on protests demanding that freedom of speech is taken away. And there are ever-increasing excuses, if you look at it, for why people should be silenced. First of all, the crucial one is whether people are upset or not. So if we're going to censor freedom of speech on the basis of it might upset someone, then all you have to do is get people upset about something, and then you have an excuse to censor it. So the more people are upset with someone having or committing the crime of having a different opinion to them, the more excuses you suddenly have to censor. Then you have hate speech. Well, what the heck does that mean? Well, what it means is anything we choose to make it mean. And then you have fake news. Well, if fake news was supposed to lead to censorship, then CNN would be off the air. MSNBC would be off the air, wouldn't they? The BBC would be off the air, But no, it's not. It's not fake news. This is the scam. Fake news means you are making the news up and telling people lies. The fake news that they are talking about is anyone that's challenging the official narrative. If it's not what the official narrative says, then it can't be true by definition, thus it's fake news. This is how it works. And what we have now, and this has all been planned, it's been in my books for years, we're having this process very clearly now of moving the communication of information from traditional media onto the internet, and particularly into the hands of a handful of Silicon Valley giants. And through information being communicated on the internet, you're now in the realms of algorithms, where you can, just with keywords and key phrases, you can have AI censoring what people see and don't see. This has been long planned. And so this explosion, this absolute explosion, tidal wave of censorship, when you challenge the official narrative, is all planned to create a situation where eventually people only see and hear what the authorities want you to see or hear. And this is where I'm coming from in terms of information. I believe that people should have the freedom to come to their own conclusions, to their own perceptions, unique to them. And to have that right, they need to have access to all possibilities and opinions from which to form their own opinions. And where does perception come from? It comes from information received. It might be a personal experience information, it might be a newspaper article, it might be on your radio show, it might be on Facebook. But from information received, you form your perceptions. And from your perceptions come your behavior. Your behavior, what you support, don't support, do or won't do, comes from your perception of that situation. And your perception comes from information you've received about that situation. And so if you control information, you control perception to a very large extent, and through that you control behavior. So this whole censorship tidal wave that's going on now, Ian, is absolutely fundamental, not just to freedom of speech, but to freedom of humanity in its entirety, because everything comes from freedom of speech. For instance, if the pharmaceutical industry, the pharmaceutical cartel, wants to tell the world that vaccines are good for you, then they should have the right to do that, as long as they support it with evidence. But equally, people who say, well, actually, we've looked at this and we don't think you're being told the truth about the effects of vaccines, that should also be heard. And then parents can say, well, I've looked at that and I've looked at that, and these are the conclusions I've come to. But what we're seeing now is a situation where people challenging the official narrative about vaccines are being censored and shut down, etc. And what is this denying? It's denying parents the right to hear all views and come to their conclusions. If all they hear, and this is just one example, I'm taking vaccines as an example, if all they hear is vaccines are good for your children and do no harm, they're going to overwhelmingly believe it, and they're going to go and have their children vaccinated.
Right. That's right. As we see in California, it's mandatory, right? It's one of the states that's made it mandatory for these kids to be vaccinated.
Well, yes, and the person that led that campaign to make them mandatory is a state senator called Dr. Richard Pan, who has taken money from the pharmaceutical industry. This has been well documented. But let's look at this. The fact is, fully enough, I'm just reading a book by an American doctor called Vaccines: A Reappraisal. It's absolutely devastating. And he's coming from decades of experience as a family doctor. You know, when you see the figures, and the figures are hidden, a very significant number of kids die or are brain damaged or have their health damaged for life by vaccines. Yes, they may be a small number, but it happens. So what mandatory vaccinations means is that a significant number of those who are not being vaccinated at the moment while they have choice, who will be vaccinated when it's mandatory, are being condemned to die to brain damage and to lifelong health problems. This is a statistical fact which is never talked about. because the media, the pharmaceutical industry, government agencies are all, oh, it's not a problem. But it is a problem for a significant number of children. And this needs to be talked about so that parents have informed choice. And I mean, if the Nazis in Germany, Ian, had mandated vaccinations, people would have said, see, that's what Nazis do. They force people to be medicated. But that's what California are doing. That's what increasing numbers of American states are doing, and that's what the British government is talking about doing. What's going on?
Okay, yeah, all right, so continue. Did you finish your thought? Pardon me.
The thing is, if you don't have the freedom to decide what goes in your own body or your children's body, then what freedom is buddy left?
David.
Yeah.
What is, from a pharmaceutical, okay, profits, obviously profit is, I mean, these people are greedy, but if we get back, let's take Bayer. That's obviously got German roots. What is the, because we've addressed vaccines a number of times on this program, and like you're saying, these kids they're damaged for life. It's irreversible damage, and now these different states are controlling this. Parents don't have a say. Well, what is? Can we insert a concept of eugenics into this scenario regarding the vaccines, or some type of? Go ahead.
Well, I mean, if people just looked at what's in vaccines, they'd be staggered. If you injected aluminium into your body, people would say you're insane. But many of these vaccines have aluminium in them. And they have animal DNA. They have human DNA.
Right.
And what has happened, Ian, as this book and other books I've read by medical professionals have pointed out, is we now have, particularly in America, which is the most vaccinated country in the world, an explosion of autoimmune disease, where the immune system is attacking its own body and attacking itself. This is because these ingredients of vaccines, they attach themselves to the body, and because they're toxic, the immune system perceives them to be a threat, and it attacks them, and in doing so, it's attacking itself, because some of the areas that these toxins attach to are elements of the immune system. And the other thing about vaccines, as these doctors point out, is because they are injected directly into the muscle, they bypass the skin and the gastric tract, which are fundamental parts of the immune system protection network. So they bypass that and get into the body through that by going directly into the muscle, and from that comes so many different problems. And this whole situation with what they call infant death syndrome, sudden infant death syndrome. You look at the figures at how many times these kids who are diagnosed with, we don't know what happens, sudden cot death syndrome, died shortly after getting vaccines. I mean, think about it. You've just come out of the womb. You don't have an immune system. You've been operating on your mother's immune system up to this point, and suddenly, wham, bang, you're hit by all these toxic vaccines in a very short period of time before your immune system's even developed. Of course, that's going to be a massive problem for the body to cope with. It's insane. And not only that, I know that JFK Kennedy Jr. has been a real advocate of pointing all this stuff out. But what they also point out, including him, is there's something like 113 other vaccines in the shadows waiting to be introduced. I mean, it's crazy. It's crazy. and the consequences are hidden from public view. I mean, how many people in America know, Ian, that the American government has given prosecution immunity to the pharmaceutical industry from lawsuits from damage from vaccines? How many people know that?
Yeah, not many.
And also, from the moment that that immunity of prosecution and lawsuits was enacted, the number of vaccines suddenly exploded because these pharmaceutical giants have now got nothing to lose.
Sure. Totally protected by the
Totally.
Absolutely, yeah. So let's kind of peel a layer back and say, okay, why are the pharmaceutical companies doing this? Again, is it just profit, or is there something deeper here? Are they able to? What's the real reason that they want that control to be able to vaccinate?
Well, I mean, I think the way to explain the bigger picture is this is what I've uncovered over the years. The human society is controlled basically by the equivalent of a spider's web. At the center of the web, you've got the spider. That is really in the shadows. They're not people that you actually see in the public arena. The strands of the web immediately around the spider are the most exclusive secret societies. Many of those don't even have names, so they're harder to track down. And then as you come out from the spider, still in the hidden, you've got the secret societies that we do know about, like the inner core of the Freemasons, the Opus Dei, the Knights Templar, Knights of Malta, and so on. And then eventually you reach what I call the cusp in the web. And this is the point where the hidden part of the web meets the seen part of the web, which is human society. And at that cusp, you've got semi-secret organizations like the Council on Foreign Relations in America, the Trilateral Commission in America, the Bilderberg Group, which is meeting in Switzerland very shortly, in fact this week, and so on. And the Club of Rome, which was started in 1968, and its job is to exploit environmental concerns to justify the transformation of human society. The whole global warming caused by humans has come to a large extent out of the Club of Rome and its associated network. And then you then enter the world of the scene. The pharmaceutical industry, the internet giants of Silicon Valley, the banking system, the giant corporations of Amazon and the oil corporations, etc. And we see decisions made in the world of the scene by those organizations, by governments and government agencies, and they appear to be random and they appear to be just happening, and but when you break it all down and you get into the rabbit hole, the society-changing decisions are being made by that spider at the center of the web. And it's playing out through the secret society network, through these cusp organizations, and into the world of the scene. And these society-changing decisions are not happening by accident, by random chance. They are happening by design. And that's why so many things in my books over the years are now happening, because I uncovered what this agenda was and what the plan was. And thus you can predict the future because it's the plan playing out. And the whole pharmaceutical industry, its role in this web is basically to undermine human health, human vitality, and human psychology through drugs and through vaccines. So you have, I mean, for me, I'm 67, I'm as healthy as hell. I'm being a doctor in living memory. I get treated by other people that understand how the body really works, and that's why it's so effective. Whereas if you look at the medical profession, it's just an appendage of the pharmaceutical industry.
Right.
Because the treatments that mainstream medical doctors are allowed to give, never mind if they choose to or not, what they're allowed to give by the rules and regulations of their profession are all those things that make money for the pharmaceutical industry.
Right.
And when you look at the toxins in vaccines, for instance, which are going into children in ever burgeoning amounts, they affect the DNA, they affect the mind, they affect the brain, they affect the psychology. You know, in this period of this vaccine explosion, we've had an explosion not just of autoimmune disease, we've had an explosion of autism and other brain problems that children have. You look at America with its money, with its society, it should have the healthiest children on earth, but it doesn't. It's way down the league table of child health. Children are getting sicker. Children are getting more and more chronic diseases, which they have over a long period of time and have to live with, all in this period of this explosion of vaccines. And you know, it's very simple. If you are confident of your position, not only do you not want to stop open debate, you welcome it because you know you'll win the debate because of the position you have. What is happening, and this is across the great swathe of subjects, vaccines being just one of them, is when they think they can't win the debate with open discourse and facts, they shut the debate down. So if you have an opinion that's different about vaccines, you must be shut down. You must be silenced. You must be demonized. If you have a different view about things going on in the world and happenings in the world that are not a part of the official narrative, then you must be called a racist or a bigot or a transphobe and all these labels that get thrown out simply because you're saying, well, I have a slightly different opinion on that. Oh, by the way, can I ask a question? No, you can't, you bigot. This is what we're facing. And you know, the most insidious form of censorship, which destroys freedom of speech more than anything else, is self-censorship. And people are being increasingly intimidated into censoring themselves because they fear the consequences of speaking their opinion. It's crazy. It's Orwell on steroids, Ian.
Well said, David. Very well said. And on that note, author of The Color Purple, Alice Walker, has come out publicly in favor of many of your stances.
Yeah, she's a wonderful human being. I met her and spent some hours with her in California last year because I've got a film coming out of my life and work. It's available at davidicke.com on June the 4th, called Renegade. And she was part of that film, and we filmed a sequence with her. And it's extraordinary. You know, I started out 30 years ago, and I was considered the crazy man. I was the national nutter of the United Kingdom because this man's just crazy what he's saying. 30 years later, the opposite is the case, and enormous numbers of people are looking at my work, stopping me in the street all over the world, wanting to talk about the information. There's a film coming out of my life with an American movie-making company, and it just shows that if you just keep walking and keep talking, don't run away and hide because people attack you, then you can get somewhere. Because there is a an awakening going on now, where more than ever before, people are starting to question what they took for granted before, and that's a great encouraging sign because we need to take our perceptions back because we've given them away.
Yeah, I began this program out of Miami it's been over 2 years now, a little over 100 episodes, and the reason this began is because this local population was sprayed, including myself, with a very controversial pesticide known as dibrom, and I linked that back to the Chevron Chemical Corporation, and I also linked the Zika scare, which is why the pesticide was used, to the same Rockefeller organization. They have a patent on a product. But David, for a moment here, as we wind down with a few more minutes left, I look at things on a different on a broader spectrum. Taken into example, the divide, which our neighbor to the south, Mexico, saw in the 1920s, and the U.S. certainly earlier than that. The divide of church and state. So you mentioned the Club of Rome. In your view, David, how much, and I opened up the show talking about a little bit of shining light on the Magna Carta and some of the different steps that came to develop the U.S. Constitution, because I think there's morally there's some wonderful. We've been talking about freedom of speech. That's one of the cornerstones of that document. But on a broader spectrum, we look at the separation of church and state and how valuable that is to give people that freedom of religion. How much, again, going back to the Club of Rome, how much, in your opinion, in your view, your research, your expertise, how much does the Vatican control that web that you speak of?
Oh, it's a massive strand in the web, definitely. I mean, when I was mentioning some of the secret societies earlier, well, the Knights Templar is connected to the Roman Church. The Knights of Malta are connected to the Roman Church. The inner core of the Jesuit order, which is part of this web, is connected to the Roman Church. Opus Dei is connected to the Roman Church. It's a massive web of manipulation. And what you have with the Roman Church and religions in general is that the upper echelons tend to fuse into the secret society network. And as you come down from that upper level of the religion hierarchy, then you come down into the followers of the religion who have no idea what the religion is really being used for. They're just believing the script and following it and doing what the script tells them. But I've charted the history of the Roman Church, and it goes back to Babylon, you see. This is an interesting kind of little story which explains so much. Actually takes us into America if we've got the time. In Babylon, which is the foundation of so much that has happened in the modern world in terms of manipulation, they worshipped a trinity of Nimrod, the father god, Ninus Tammuz, the virgin-born son, who was said to be a reincarnation of Nimrod, hence father and son were one. And the third point of the Babylonian trinity was Queen Semiramis, the goddess. And when the Babylonian religion relocated to Rome, which it did, it remanifested as Father, Son, and Holy Ghost. Now, in the Christian Trinity, the Holy Ghost is symbolized as a dove. In Babylon, that point of the Trinity, Queen Semiramis, the goddess, was symbolized as a dove. And what they said about Queen Semiramis in Babylon is that she was the Queen of Heaven, the Mother of God, and these attributes were then given over to Mother Mary in the Roman version of the same story, the same myths. Now, this inner core, this spider core of this web of control, they worship this religion, and they put symbols of this religion all over the place. And when you break down the real meaning, the Statue of Liberty is holding the torch of the illuminated ones, the Illuminati. The lighted torch is a major symbol of this network, this web of control. And what they use is the language of inversion. So what something means to the general population means the opposite, the inverted opposite to this web. So people would look at the Statue of Liberty and they would think freedom, symbol of liberty. But the Statue of Liberty was given to New York by French Freemasons in Paris that knew exactly what it really meant. It's the goddess of Babylon. And so to this web, this cabal, it's an inversion of liberty. And on an island in the River Seine in Paris is an absolute mirror image, smaller, but a mirror image of the Statue of Liberty. Another point in the symbolism is that one of their symbols, for various reasons, it's a symbol that represents an ancient god called Molech or Moloch, which is named in the Bible. It's a demonic deity which they used to sacrifice children to. Well, they symbolize this as an owl. And so we have the Skull and Bones Society, which, of course, is one of the big secret societies in America that's produced presidents like the Bush presidents, etc. Yeah. And there is a whole network of secret societies in America that uses these symbols. And the owl symbol is very prevalent in an infamous place in Northern California called Bohemian Grove. This is where the elite go to do their rituals and their various horrific things at a summer camp. And the focus of attention, the symbol that they worship in this Bohemian Grove, is a 40-foot stone owl, which is Molech. It's this ancient deity to which they used to sacrifice children. Now, here's the point, and if people are watching this, go onto Google Maps or go onto a map of Washington, D.C., look at the road system around the Capitol building, and you'll see that it is a very clear owl standing on a pyramid, and the Capitol building is in the belly of the owl. I talked about this the other day in some talk, and there were some people that weren't into all this, and they said, oh, that's very strange. And they went on their phones and they went through Google Maps and they went, whoa, it's an owl. So this symbolism is actually put all around us, and it means nothing to the general population, but it means something very significant to this cabal.
And this is, you're saying it has roots through Rome and into Babylon, but certainly...
Oh, into Babylon, absolutely.
Certainly there are groups and organizations, you speak of these organizations that exist today, but are they families? Hence, is that why royalty still survives in the UK, for instance?
Yeah.
Is it a bloodline?
Yeah, I mean, if you go deep in the rabbit hole, it gets really bizarre and really far out. But basically, royalty appeared and aristocracy appeared all around the world because they believed their bloodline was special. They believed their bloodline was of the gods, not of God, but of the gods, which takes us into a whole new a whole new area of where all this actually came from. And then royalty used to rule the roost based on genetic inheritance. And there came a point when eventually people started to rebel. We're not having that anymore. Well, I mean, we still have a head of state in Britain who's bizarrely that's done on royal bloodline, which is just extraordinary in 2019. But so what happened then is that these bloodlines that were for a long time overtly royal and overtly aristocratic, the blue bloods, they went underground. They took off their coronets and they put on their business suits. And they took over politics, they took over banking, they took over corporations and governments. And but they still perceive themselves as royalty, as special bloodlines, and they still interbreed. I mean, you look at the Eastern establishment families of the United States; they interbreed as much as any royal group
absolutely.
do, because they're still trying to hold a genetic code, this is the point, by interbreeding. And if they breed outside of that code is very quickly diluted. That's why they don't want, quote, commoners being brought in and diluting the bloodline. I remember when Kate Middleton married Prince William, and she was described as a commoner. And people said to me, see, they do have commoners in the royal family. That's old Kate. Very shortly afterwards, it came out that Kate Middleton comes from one of the most prestigious aristocratic families, bloodlines in England. So, just because on the surface they don't seem to be royal, well, that it's and it's all about genetics. They're obsessed with genetics and holding this bloodline code that I mentioned. And it's the same with the dark suits, the business suit level of this bloodline. It's the same. The Rockefellers and all these people, all these aristocratic, if not in fact in name, in fact. Eastern establishment families, they're all into breeding like crazy because there's this particular code they don't want to lose.
So there's a couple different angles to take, and we've gone over time, but that's okay. We've had on program David Serrata, and David Serrata talks about the pyramid in Giza, and it is equidistant to all 7 continents on the planet. In that sense, it's at the center of the planet in that regard. And he says it was a crystal oscillator used for transportation. You bring up symbolism, i.e., the Statue of Liberty and the owl, and these different symbols. If we can go to family, the genetic root, there's definitely that to take into consideration and to observe. But then we also kind of incorporate dimensions, and you began talking about the Isle of Wight and what Wight represents, and certainly we've got a major percentage of the human population that believes in Jesus Christ, and if not, they believe in Muhammad or whatnot. But they certainly believe that they believe in things that they can't see.
Yeah.
If some of these symbols, let's say, are they speaking to beings that may be outside the dimension, which seems very difficult for a human being to say. Next week we've got on Oxford University lecturer Dr. Young-Hae Chi, and Dr. Young-Hae talks about alien visitations. I don't want to go too far out there, but again, he talks about alien visitations and humanity, and he says that there's an active interbreeding of extraterrestrials with human beings to kind of combat. This is his research to combat the coming destruction of climate change. In your research, David, have you seen, again, and not to go back to that communication because you hadn't seen, and I mentioned ghosts, but is there possibly a power or an energy, and maybe the Club of Rome simplifies it and says, good God, bad God, so you've got Jesus Christ and you've got the devil, but is there a control of an unseen energy that can be identified maybe to a planet within our system? Again, it's getting over that mainstream push of kind of keeping people to think within a certain boundary. It's stepping outside that boundary.
Yeah, I mean, I've written about this at enormous length in my books over the years. If you go to that spider I talked about, ultimately that's not human. And you're looking at a network within the world of the human world, the world that we can see and we experience, that is representing that hidden power. I mean, this manipulation, centralizing power more and more to the point now where very few people run the world, has been a process. And it's been a process of people being born, playing a part in pushing it forward, then dying, someone else takes over, push it forward further, then dies. So there had to be a force that oversaw this whole thing, because people coming in and out, I mean, it's not going to coordinate itself that way. There has to be an overall power that's actually orchestrating this. I've written about it at great length. But if people have a problem with thinking that that's far out, let's just look at some basic facts here. When we look through our eyes, we are actually perceiving what we call the world, a narrow band of frequency that is so narrow it's unbelievable. According to mainstream science, the electromagnetic spectrum is about 0.005% of what exists in the universe. Visible light, which is the only frequency band that we can see, everything that we see and we call the world is within that band of frequency, is a smear of the 0.005%. So almost the entirety of existence is beyond our visual reality. So when you see the extraordinary diversity of form, both among humans and among the animal and the natural world, within a smear of 0.5% of the universe,
right?
What the heck forms of life and diversity of life and form and everything exists in the entirety of reality and existence beyond the tiny band that we can see? It's literally infinite, phenomenal. And you look at the night sky, and even though there seems to be a vast heavens and all those lights, what you're looking at is a tiny fraction of the Milky Way galaxy. Right. And until the 1920s, science believed there was one galaxy, the Milky Way. The latest highest estimate, less than 100 years later, of galaxies in the universe is 2 trillion. So I think we can put aside the fact that humanity is not the only form of life as we know it. Something else to point out is that according to mainstream science and their projection of the size of the universe, compared with that, planet Earth is the equivalent of a billionth of a pinhead. So the idea that human life is the only life that exists is bordering off on, if not crossing the line of insanity. So the question is not, does life exist out there? Of course it does. Is it manipulating human society? Or is some of it, not all of it, of course, is some of it manipulating human society? And after 30 years of full-time research, talking to insiders and ancient carriers of the knowledge in ancient societies, endless different variety of sources, it's very clear that they are. And that this so-called 1% and the elite are actually representatives in our reality of this force, which is manipulating human society to a particular end. You see, this whole explosion of technology is not happening randomly. It's a massive part of the end game of assimilating human consciousness into the control system. This is why you're having people like Ray Kurzweil at Google saying openly that by 2030, the human brain will start to be connected to artificial intelligence, and artificial intelligence will start to do human thinking more and more until it's basically replaced human thinking, and we become basically computer terminals on an AI internet. What he's describing, and I think knowingly, is the assimilation of human consciousness into this force that's been leading to this point for a very, very long time. And this whole explosion of technology is a trap. It's a prison. First you first you get people addicted to technology that they hold. Then you get technology on the body, because where you want to go is in the body. So now we have this explosion of things that are connected to the internet and AI that are on the body. And the final stage is to get in the body and in the brain. And I spoke in Sweden last year, and at that point, there's more now. 3,000 people have been microchipped in Sweden.
Oh my goodness!
We've just had the trade union organisation in Britain and the employers' organisation in Britain come out just about 2 months or so ago, saying they're very concerned at the number of companies that are in the process of planning to microchip their workers. This was in my books in 1994, 93, 94, that the microchipping agenda was coming. Because if you can uncover the projected agenda, you can predict the future, because it's the agenda unfolding, like I said. So this whole AI, artificial intelligence, is actually a Trojan horse to replace human consciousness. I mean, it sounds far out. Of course it does. And it is, because it's crazy, but it's happening. And this is what it's all about. This is why AI is taking over everything.
Well, mandatory vaccines lead to mandatory microchip.
Well, I'll tell you a story. This goes back to 1996. And I was in America, going from place to place, talking to next to nobody in those days. And I was introduced at his prompting to a CIA scientist who lived in California. And I was invited to his home. And I went along, and he told me, well, I'll tell you a story first, before he told me this. He was telling me how he was being forced by the CIA to do things that he didn't want to do.
What's the name of this person, David? Sorry.
I can't say the name of the guy for his sake. But he was a CIA scientist. And I said to him, well, why do you do it? Why do you do what they tell you? And he started to open his shirt. And he opened his shirt, and on his chest was like a see-through shampoo sachet, only smaller. And inside of it was an orangey gold liquid. And he said, this is why I have to do it. And he told me the story, and I've heard this from one other person, a CIA person, since. But he said that when he joined the CIA, he thought he was serving his country. He was a scientist. And then he realized that actually he was being asked to take part in this whole control mechanism. And so he resisted. He said, I'm not doing it. I don't want to know about this. And he said he left his home one day shortly after this conversation. And then he remembers nothing until he woke up on like a medical type bench in a room. And he realized there was something on his chest. And he opened his shirt, looked on his chest, and this thing was on his chest. And he explained to me, he said, what they do is they make your body dependent on this drug. And the drug has to be replaced every 72 hours, or you start to die a very unpleasant death. He said, I know that because I basically said, stick it anyway, and they didn't replace it. And I went into a very unpleasant state of ill health, to say the least. And they replaced the drug, and he recovered. And he's been, at that time anyway, he was working for them. He had a family, he had kids. Bizarrely, they're all around him, what he's telling me. And therefore he was locked into this bind of literally do or die. And that night he said to me, and this is long before nanotechnology was ever mentioned, he said, you know, in the secret projects, there are microchips that are so small, they are inserted in hypodermic needles in vaccination programs. And this was 1996. And you think, what? Microchips coming out of hypodermic needles? And then what came as the years passed was the revelation, which was well known long before, of nanotechnology. So, see, once you can put something in someone's body and press it to enter the body, who the heck knows what's really in there? Very, very few people have to know for that to happen. I mean, the people are told, okay, this is a vaccination program, so vaccinate these people. So people, doctors and nurses, are vaccinating people, thinking they're doing them benefit. They don't know what's in the vaccine or what its effect might be. They're clueless. And this compartmentalization, where only a few at the top need to know what's going on and everyone else is compartmentalized from that knowledge, is how the whole thing works.
David, in the United States, things seem to have changed when Woodrow Wilson signed the Federal Reserve Act. In my view, John F. Kennedy, who seemed to be praised bipartisanly, he seemed to be praised by any American, regardless of political party on the majority. Had his life been preserved, do you think that would have slowed down this agenda or taken it a different way? And if so, what way would it have taken it?
Well, I think if what he said was genuine, and I think there are some indications that it was, then I do think he would have taken America in a different direction. But you look at presidents that get in the way, and they invariably don't last very long. They're brought down by whatever, including assassination. And if you look at Woodrow Wilson, he was controlled by a couple of people called Edward Mandell House and a guy called Bernard Baruch, who were agents of the Rothschilds and the Rockefellers. And the Federal Reserve was an absolute Rockefeller Rothschild scam to take over the American economy. And a lot of Americans would believe, because that's what's kind of the image they get, that the Federal Reserve is a government agency. It's not. It's a private organization.
Right.
And what it's done is take control of the American economy and make an absolute fortune by lending the government money. It's absolute madness. So the Federal Reserve was manipulated into place, and the American economy has been in ever-increasing levels of debt ever since.
That's right.
And Wilson was a complete puppet. He was just a gopher for those two fellas, who were gophers for others like the Rothschilds and the Rockefellers. And then you look at Kennedy. He was getting in the way, so they got rid of him. I mean, you know this whole discrediting term that they use, conspiracy theorist and conspiracy theory, that actually came into widespread use because of the CIA. The documents exist, you can read them. They contacted major media organizations in the 1960s, urging them to use the terms conspiracy theory and conspiracy theorists to discredit those people that bizarrely, they must have been crazy, bizarrely didn't believe that a single bullet went through several people, changing crazy angles to explain the Kennedy assassination. They didn't understand why a bullet that was apparently shot from behind actually hit the president in the forehead. Crazy people, you know, and they needed to be discredited. So conspiracy theorist and conspiracy theory came into widespread use because of that. And of course, people are still using that to try to discredit people like me and anyone else who's questioning the official narrative. And the other thing about the Kennedy assassination is they wanted the Vietnam War for a number of reasons, not least in massive levels of drug running in Southeast Asia. And and so he was going to pull out. He didn't want it, and so when they assassinated him, in came Lyndon Johnson, who immediately exacerbated and expanded it into what became the Vietnam War through something called the Gulf of Tonkin incident, which was a total lie, which has now been well documented to have been a lie. So we're looking at this tidal wave of deceit that we are subjected to, and the deceit is targeting our perceptions to try to get us to see the world in ways that will accept the world they want to impose upon us. And we need to take our perceptions back and start questioning things and not just accepting them just because some guy in government or wherever tells us it's true. Invariably, it's not.
Right. David, we've got to wind down, but for listeners, you've given a lot for them to think about. Geographically, that's the world that we know. Maybe not physically, but geographically. Are you able to pinpoint on the globe any one area that can funnel down to being the spider of this web?
Well, London is a massive centre. Not the British government, no. The centre of this secret society web. London and Rome and now Berlin are massive centres for this web. Of course, the United States. But a lot of what the United States does in terms of, if you like, shooting the bullets have been loaded and the gun has been targeted in places like London, Secret Society London, Secret Society Rome, Berlin, etc. Again, not Merkel, the Secret Society level of Germany. And also Israel is a massive centre for this manipulation as well. And this is why you get all this use of American troops to go and kill and be killed in wars that benefit no one except Israel, And what's happening is that there has now been a ramping up of this whole, what I call anti-Semitism industry, and a protection racket, which is not there to protect Jewish people from discrimination. It's there to protect the far-right government in Israel from legitimate criticism and exposure. Therefore, they've now redefined anti-Semitism as criticism of Israel, not for the benefit of Jewish people. They couldn't give a damn about Jewish people any more than the cabal in America could give a damn about American people. But it's a protection racket to stop criticism of Israel. And so there are a number of centers, but they are the main ones, I think. But other parts of the world that are also involved in this, but they are key ones in the Western world.
And if we layer back, we take those centers geographically that certainly control the overwhelmingly majority from a to use this term, a layman's view of the global economy. If we layer back and we take into consideration what you have said about the links to Babylon, where else are we then led? And also couple into the together the electronic matrix, i.e., the microchips and the artificial intelligence. Are we able to thread maybe CERN or any other?
CERN's massively important. You see, the Earth has a magnetic field, electromagnetic field. And we're interacting with that all the time. We are, on one level, are electromagnetic information fields, what some people call the auric field. And at that level, we are interacting with the Earth's energetic field and other levels of reality as well. But let's keep it at that level. So anything that impacts upon the Earth's energetic field impacts upon us. It's like we are fish swimming in that sea. And if you want to affect all the fish at the same time, you don't affect the fish, you affect the sea, because they're all swimming in it. And things like CERN, as well as this explosion of technologically generated radiation, millions of times greater than it was at the turn of the 20th century, is fundamentally affecting the human energetic field, and thus it's affecting human psychology and human health. And when they bring in this 5G, which is a massive ramping up of this impact on human psychology and human health from technological frequencies, you're going to see catastrophic, eventually, manifestations of that. And this is why they are introducing 5G without, as they admitted on Capitol Hill just a few weeks ago, the telecommunications industry, without any official independent studies into its psychological and physical health on humanity. But at the spider level, and that which interacts with the spider, they know exactly what the effect is going to be. And they're introducing it because of that effect. The brain processes information electrically, and the brain operates within a certain band of frequency. If you can impact upon the brain with technological frequencies within its frequency band of operation, you disturb the information processing of the brain. And we call this psychological problems, and we call it Alzheimer's, and we call it dementia, etc. And this is why there's been, in this technological period, and also in the vaccine period, this explosion of dementia and Alzheimer's. And they say, oh, we don't know why it's happening. Just look at cause and effect. This happened at this time, and that's when it started.
Exactly. Yeah.
So you have a study in Britain saying that there's been this massive rise in brain tumours in children, and they're saying, well, they don't know why it is. And you're like, they're happening around the ear, right? Well, yeah. Well, I think I've got a good idea what's causing them then. But to say it's happening, they have to an extent, say it's happening because it's happening. But they say they don't know why it's happening, because to say why it's happening is to challenge the whole ethos and reason for this technological stuff being used, not least by children, because they have a thing testing mobile phones called Sam Phantom Head. And it's literally a mock-up head. And it's based on the skull of an American soldier, right? And they have thick skulls. I'm not having a go at them, but adults have thick skulls. Children don't. And they test the safety of mobile phones on the basis of a mock-up of a thick-skulled adult man, and these telecommunications companies push their frequency impact up to the limits of that Sam Phantom Head, but that is way above the limit that harms children that have thin skulls. And so they know exactly why it's being caused, but they won't tell you because that will put mobile phones and the way they operate under the spotlight, and they don't want that because it's part of the agenda that they exist.
Yeah. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. David Icke. David, some final words and parting words for listeners and what they might be able to look forward to in Renegade.
Well, what happened is that I was approached by an American movie-making company, not because they supported what I'm doing, but because they thought my story would make a great film, and so they followed me around, fly on the wall, for much of a year. We went to 4 countries: America, both coasts, Croatia, Britain, Ireland, etc., and they edited it. I had nothing to do with it, and what's come out is I think amazing. it's not just a story of my life. That's just the backbone. The real meat of it is the information that's in the film about all these things we're talking about and other things as well. And in the premieres, it's blown people away. It's been incredible. And the best part of it is that where people who are kind of into my information have taken friends along who don't know anything about it, those friends have been massively impacted by, hey, this makes sense of the world. So I'm hoping it will have a big impact in getting people to realize that what we're being told by officialdom is not necessarily the truth. And it's available on June the 4th, just a few days from now, via davidicke.com. How you can get it will all be there. And I've also just finished a book which is coming out in September, in fact on September the 11th, which is demolishes the official story of 9/11 and lays out who actually did it. And it wasn't 19 hijackers. And the uncovering of that whole 9/11 story uncovers the greater picture of what's happening in the world. The book is called The Trigger because 9/11 was the trigger for so much that has followed. Without 9/11, that wouldn't have happened.
Beautifully said, David. Beautifully said. Thank you for joining Winwood Radio and discussing your truth. We look forward to inviting you back on the program.
Pleasure, Ian. Thank you. People say I talk about some weird stuff, some far out stuff. But how about that chair that you're sitting in isn't solid? How weird is that? This reality is nothing like we think it is.
When I saw what Icke is doing, I was a bit jealous on him. Wow, look at what this guy's doing.
I don't know if anybody else could do it but him, actually.
We are in a period now where speaking your truth is not just important, it's utterly crucial to where humanity goes from here. The world needs renegades.